Hey everyone, we are excited to launch the Bright Mind subscription. Unlimited access to all of our CE courses, webinars, and expert speakers all in one place.
And for a limited time for the month of December, you can get 50% off. Normally $299 a year, now just $149 for your first year.
That's unlimited CE on your schedule for half price.
Head over to psychedpractice.com and click sign up, and the discount is already applied. We look forward to seeing you there. And as always, be well, stay psyched. This episode of the Psyched to Practice podcast is sponsored by PAR, where psychological assessments meet innovation.
PAR has been the gold standard in the industry for over 45 years and has empowered professionals in education, healthcare, private practice, and research with trusted tools and cutting-edge solutions.
Discover more at parinc.com. Again, that is parinc.com. Creating connections, changing lives. Welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one-stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insights from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me as always,
Ray Christner.
And before we get to today's topic, we wanted to do some housekeeping. So we're excited to announce that we have 2 live CE webinars to add to our Psyched to Practice library. On Friday, March 27th, 2026 at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, Ray will be presenting Same Symptoms, Different Stories, Differentiating Neurodevelopmental and Emotional Disorders. And on Friday, April 17th, 2026 at 12 o'clock noon Eastern Time, I will be presenting Automate the Audit, Building Sustainable Symptoms for ADHD Success. Head over to www.psychedpractice.com to register.
Next, we're excited to announce that we will have a booth this year at NASP 2026 in Chicago from February 25th to February 27th. Unfortunately, Paul won't be able to make the trip, but I'll be there along with Dan Florell and others from the Psyched to Practice team. If you're there at the conference, be sure to check out my presentation, Exploring the Emotional Disturbance Multiverse, Practical Assessment and Support on February 24th at 4 p.m. And catch Dan's presentation, With Great AI Powers Comes Great Responsibility on February 24th at 1 p.m.
I'm sad to be missing it for sure, but please be sure to stop by and say hello, grab some merch, and have the opportunity to win some discounts on our CEU site if you're at the convention. And, speaking of NASP, please stop by PAR's booth at NASP as well. PAR has been sponsoring the Psyched to Practice podcast for some time now. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar, PAR is a psychological assessment developer that's been supporting the mental health community for over 45 years. They offer a variety of tools and services to those in the mental health community. And I know I really appreciate the opportunity to have given a PAR talk on adult ADHD. And Ray, I know that you've done quite a few PAR talks as well.
Yeah. And also be sure to check out their booth on the 25th from 4 to 5 p.m., where I'll be answering some questions about the new test that I'm developing with PAR and can give a lot of information about what we're doing.
And with that, let's get into today's topic, recognizing fit when it comes to working with our caseload. And, when is it that we are a good fit and when are we not?
Yeah, I think so. This is a topic maybe we don't talk enough about because I think there's a lot of reasons, but, partially maybe our work setting where we just get referrals. Somebody else puts them on our schedule as they come in, or I know those who are school psychologists, you work for a district and you get a referral and you kind of have to deal with it. But maybe that's not what we should be doing. Maybe we should kind of have a different plan. But again, I don't know that we talk enough about it. And I think it's not comfortable to talk about. Like we go into this because we want to help everybody, but can we?
Yeah. And, I think it takes a lot for us to recognize that, no, we really can't help everyone. And in fact, doing so puts them in jeopardy, puts ourselves in jeopardy, and just the quality of care is not going to be there. It's that, you can be a jack of all trades, but you're then a master of none in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's definitely something to be said about being a generalist. And I think we all are on some level. But then there are times that maybe our skills are put to the test as a generalist, and we do need to, look at that specialist. I mean, I think of just the metaphor of, a general practitioner. They refer to specialists that have certain area of expertise, and I think clinically we have to think like that, and really dispel this myth of that a good clinician can handle everything, because I just don't know that we can. I mean, I sure know there are times that I know that I'm not the right fit, and we have to find a way to kind of do that gracefully. So, maybe let's kind of talk a little bit about when it's not a good fit. I guess that's maybe a good starting point. So when you talk about fit, Paul, what's that mean for you?
I think maybe talking about what isn't a good fit, it would maybe be easier to describe, like, what do I think is a good fit? And I think it's both when, I, with my background expertise, as well as like just general availability, location, all of these other factors are well aligned with the clients that I'm working with, where it feels like we have the capacity to make some positive change. And it shouldn't be easy necessarily. Like, sometimes it's easy, and that's wonderful, but more so that it feels like it's within reach and that we are capable. And that reach might be a stretch, that reach might be familiar, but it needs to be within our reach, and it needs to feel like there's a level of, I think, confidence as we're navigating, not constant confidence, but enough that more often than not, we feel like we're making steps with intention and being able to recognize, and maybe also being able to back up our claims and justify why are we doing what we're doing. And if it's I don't know, then really maybe like that's maybe a point when like we need to stop and assess. So that there's a lot to, it's kind of felt like I was wishy-washy and kind of riding the fence, but I think that is really important. Like a fit, I think, is very fluid in a way, and we can be a good fit at certain moments for a client. And I think that can even shift. Same client, different circumstance, or different moment for us as clinicians when we no longer are really going to be the best fit there. Yeah,
I like that. And I kind of think of it the same way. And I think, and we'll kind of maybe go on and talk a little bit about this, but you used the word stretch earlier. And, I think when I talk about fit, I think there's fit that's comfortable and right in the moment, but there's also fit that helps us stretch our skills and expand, which has been something I've always appreciated kind of in my career. But like, when I think of fit, I think of clinical competence. I think a part of it, what's our scope of practice that we really want to focus on, our training, our experience, is it something that we've never even worked with under supervision? But then I also, I think there's also structural things for us that we have to think of, like our availability. Like, as I'm, I don't want to say winding down my practice, but my practice has changed dramatically in the past few years. I do more evaluations now than I do therapy cases, still have a caseload, but I'm also very aware of my availability. So, I travel a lot to present and do those things. So I have to be cautious. Like, when I'm bringing somebody on for a therapy case, what if I'm gone for a month out presenting? Is that appropriate for them? Is that good for them? Can I provide the acuity of care that they have? I'm not in a position right now where I could see somebody probably twice a week regularly. Earlier in my career, I could do that. I would do it easily. So I think that even that structural piece, we kind of have to keep in mind. And because if we understand it, it also helps us create better boundaries around it. Because while I would love to take some patients on that they call and I'm like, oh, I know I could do good work with this person, I have to step back and go, but is that fair? Like, is that fair to know that I might not be there every week and they really do need it every week? And even though I think I could do good work with them, referring or making them aware that this might not be the best fit right now, I think is a better response. And now a word from our sponsor. PAR's AI Report Writer is an AI-boosted tool that generates comprehensive reports, including interpretations and recommendations based on scores from a wide range of popular assessment tools. Spend less time on report writing and more time supporting students. Learn more at parinc.com/AI. That is parinc.com/AI. And now back to our conversation.
And, I certainly, I don't ever really want to draw or bring the client's capacity for independence and their ability to make informed decisions that are treatment. But I can also think of times when there can be a sense of like, hey, whatever you have, I will make it work.
Right.
In that sense, that's where that acuity piece is so important of like, okay, that's what they're saying, but is what I have going to be enough to truly meet the need? And just because they are telling me that, yes, it is, and they're okay with, even if it's not enough, like it's going to be better. That I think is a really hard position. And yet I think someone that we have to be very mindful of because again, whether that's maybe a crisis moment occurs or even just, as time goes on and, there is this development. It's like, oh, well, hey, like now that we're established, I really need afternoons and like, really that sweet spot of like when schools are out and when work is out.
Right.
It's, whoa, that is not what I was sharing that. And so we then have this conflict of now we've developed this maybe rapport and how is this going to shift or change? And so I think we can't be mind readers. And again, I never want to challenge a client like outright and say like, no, you are wrong. But I think we can also reflect back. I hear you. But from what I'm hearing here, as well as like what the support you're needing, I don't know that this is going to be a fit that's going to be successful for you,
sure, or
that I'm going to be able to really kind of honor in a way that I feel confident in that and put my name behind.
Yeah. I think just hearing you say, I was so glad you kind of brought that up because I think there's a maturity, I think, that happens with us as clinicians. And, I think earlier in my career, someone would call and may have been only in practice for a few years. And they'd be like, but so-and-so referred me and they said how great you were. And, I feels good. It feels great. And despite that, I think as we grow clinically mature, we're able to not look past it. I still appreciate that people would even think that about me, but to also not go into that and make that change our opinion and to opinion that we're maybe not the right fit. And, I had just a similar situation where I had somebody who, they're in a difficult situation. And they, wanted me to do an evaluation and did an intake. And I mean, they couldn't have been any more complimentary. And it was all these, and that felt good. My ego was really kind of pumped up about that part. But as we went through the intake, I recognized I just wasn't the right evaluator. And part of it because some of the areas that I would have needed to do, I'm just not that competent in. And don't think that, we'll talk about the stretch piece in a bit, but it's not an area that I think I can do well in stretching my skills at this point in my career. And I had to say, like, listen, I appreciate all that. That's great. However, there's a few things that I'm not sure that I am the right fit. And maybe for part of it I am, but I would feel better if I can collaborate with you to find someone who really is going to meet that need and to refer it. And that's a hard conversation, but I think it's important. It's, I guess, Paul, I'm kind of curious, like, do you remember like a bad fit case that you've had? Like, do you have like, was there ever like, when in your career did you experience something like that was a bad fit?
Well, my first kind of, actually maybe even my first foray into mental health in its entirety. And, I started off as a TSS, which is part of a wraparound service here in Pennsylvania, and my first case, like it was an eye opener, like, and I didn't really like know a lot, but I felt like I was like, okay, I have a handle on this, and like I think I had the false sense of confidence, and then I didn't really have a choice. I was just told, hey, now we're assigning you this individual. And they were much older. They were much like the presentation and the needs were so vastly different. And when I came in trying to use what I just experienced with a much younger, again, challenging, but in a way that I felt, again, in hindsight now, I was just well adapted to and being able to work with.
Yeah.
And working with, an older teen that really was not the good fit for me.
Yeah.
And I was trying to use a similar approach. And, maybe there could have been that therapeutic alliance, but I didn't really necessarily know better at that time.
Mm.
And I took this approach and I became just someone else that was trying to tell them what to do and lecture them and not the intention ever, but it really then became something where we did not work well. And we worked together for quite a while and I tried different things, but ultimately there was a sense of, I think, resistance. And, again, I was there because, a lot of his parents wanted me to be there and support him that way. Just was not a great fit as a whole there. And so kind of looking back at that, I think if I, in that position now, I think I'd approach it very differently. Yeah. So fit can change, but in that moment, just kind of going in overconfident and really not taking necessarily the time that, really would have been beneficial to say, how do I take this experience that I've had and try to apply it in a way that's going to meet him where he's at rather than coming in saying, hey, I know what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember kind of my first one and this is probably not a secret to anybody that's listened, I'm just not a good couples therapist. I just am not, I own it. It's, but one of my early jobs, I was working with a community mental health center and they, it was a productivity type in environment. So they just filled your schedule. And, man, I knew from the start, that probably wasn't a good fit, but again, you comply and kind of go, okay, I'll take this on my caseload. But, it really for me, I just remember when I even just think about it even now, and this is 28 years ago, the emotion for me in being in the session and actually as a therapist kind of going I knew I wasn't the right fit and I knew I was, but as a young therapist being afraid to say, hey, I'm not good at this. And I remember bringing it up in supervision and talk about bad supervision another time. But, the person was like, hey, but you got to make sure you'll be under with your productivity numbers if you don't do it. I wouldn't refer the person out and they gave me a few strategies, but it was not good supervision. And I worked through it. I plowed through it, but it was a point where at the end we accomplished something, but I never felt good when I was in those sessions. And, just remember it just being when I would see it on my schedule, I would almost go, oh my gosh, that's today. I have to do this session. And that's not what we're supposed to do, and I think from that, I think it was honestly the last time I think I really felt that way because it opened my eyes to be wait, that's not fair to them. It's not fair to them that I'm stressed out about this experience. All because it wasn't the right fit. So I've been much more cautious about paying attention to those moments. Yeah. And do you have what are your kind of red flags for you? What are you?
And maybe a bit of a silly metaphor here, but my thought goes to if I'm buying a new pair of boots or something like that, I think it's okay for them to be stiff and uncomfortable initially, but eventually I want there to be that level of comfort. And as I was hearing you describe that, there's quite a few different, I think, poor fits that I've had in terms of my career. And that comfort just never comes. Yeah. And I think that's a good signal to say, hey, if there's a consistent sense of unease or dread or just discomfort, and, and if we're not feeling there's progress, we're not feeling a greater sense of confidence, that's a really important sign that we should be hey, these don't fit. Yeah. Again, if I buy a pair of boots and it's I buy 2 sizes too small, they're going to be uncomfortable, but they're just never going to be comfortable.
Right,
versus the pair that I do get, might be stiff initially, but eventually I'll break them in and they'll feel good and they'll feel well worn. And again, feeling that sense of like familiarity there. And I think, so I think that might be one of those signs I look for of, let me maybe not first impressions, because I've been wrong with first impressions.
Sure.
And
yeah, no, I agree.
Again, it was a community mental health position that I was in, my first outpatient setting there, and got a referral where the individual was being released from prison and they were being mandated. They'd been in there for 35 years, schizophrenia. They had killed someone to get into prison and, didn't know that they had schizophrenia. I had a stack of probably 400 pages of their overall clinical history. And I had an intake later that afternoon with them.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, what am I doing here? Like and that sense of unease, that stiffness, that discomfort, and the intake session, I was really stressed, and I can't really say I felt a significant sense of ease. I didn't quite trust it, but the intake went far better than I expected. And it wasn't until we'd gotten really to get to know each other that really, and not even considering, he really had been so far behind in so many different technological advancements and just cultural advancements for not, and just again, whether that's a phone, whether that's a self-checkout, whether that's the internet, or it could be like, we talked about what is reintegrating and reconnecting and finding support systems. It was really successful. But so that was a sense of like that unease. I don't want it to be the only sign I'm looking for, because eventually it grew into it. Like, I saw we had a session scheduled and there was that comfort there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always happen with everyone.
No, I love that example, because I think that's really, I don't think we have to make first impressions that it's going to go bad. And I think that some of the things that I've developed some expertise in was because I was open to taking on those challenges. But I think that the emotion piece is, does that get kind of your boots scenario? Like, does it ever get better? And does that initial feeling of, okay, this could be a challenge, which I think is good, we should challenge ourselves, but does that become kind of a dread because we don't feel that we're doing what we should? And I think that's always a piece for me. I think part of it is this idea of stretching our skills. And, I think that case, maybe that just went well because it was not as difficult as you thought.
Yes.
But I've had others where, again, I'll use an example. I had an early case in my career with, as a school psychologist, and it was a student who was diagnosed with Prader-Willi syndrome. Didn't even know what it was. It was like I came out of grad school and or had anybody with this case or this diagnosis, and met the person, met the family, kind of went well. Like, it was a kind of a good initial meeting. And for me, it became then a challenge of, I want to know more about this. I want to, so for me, I've always used the terms that I have stretch protocols. Like, I get something that I don't know a lot about. And then what is my kind of way to then make that something that I could kind of stretch out? So initially, it was something I didn't know and may not have been the perfect fit from my training and competence at that point, but it was a challenge that I kind of wanted to take on. And so, I came up with my protocol. So I started reading journal articles. I found a training. This goes way back. So it was on a CD-ROM that I purchased that someone sent that I got to watch about Prader-Willi. And I, consulted with the family, who became a great part of my training. Like when I would say, like, tell me about, like, what's this like living with someone who struggles with food insecurities, where they'll, eat and clear the whole cabinets out. Like, it was like this whole kind of piece. But they taught me so much. And then on top of that, found somebody who was an expert in that area, who was willing to consult with me on the case. And so from that, I created a stretch protocol. Now, fast forward, I've seen, now I can't even tell you how many kids that have, and adults who have had that diagnosis. And I don't necessarily say that I'm an expert in it, but I'm very comfortable working around some of the challenges that families may face with that. But it started as maybe not a good fit, but sometimes we can use this as a way to stretch. And then other times, if it was a couple situation, I would move to referral. It goes to that kind of a difference.
And I think a part of that, like with your example there, not so much the idea of an imposter syndrome, but rather just like that lack of awareness, but the willingness to go and learn. And so I do feel like, and it's not about, not about shaming a clinician who says, why aren't you, Ray, why aren't you willing to go and like really refine your skills as couples? Like there is going to be that, what do you want to tailor your career to look like? And also what is your capacity? Because whether we're trained or not doesn't mean that they don't take doesn't take its toll. But I do think at times we can also really be reserved in what we do feel like we can take on. And so, in the same way, I don't want to encourage individuals to overreach or overstretch. I think stretching is important and not just staying only in that comfort zone. Because, if we're kind of reframing that to the avoidance element of things, like we know that it's going to become really stagnant. It's become very limiting in a lot of ways. And so I think just as much as important, not overstretching, can't understretch either. Like we need to have some form of that and finding this like Goldilocks range of, I do think more competence than maybe stretch in a way, but we need a bit of both there for us to really feel a sense of fulfillment in that continued growth and development in our careers.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it's always been kind of a 70-30 kind of rule where 70% of the time I'm going to stay really within my current existing wheelhouse. And then 30% of the time is going to be dedicated to stretching kind of my skills. But I do think it has to be done strategically. Like, because I think, haphazardly it is not a good thing. Like I'll go back to the Prater-Willi case that I had initially. One of the reasons that made me decide, one, I was comfortable in the situation. The family was comfortable with me. The child was comfortable with me. So there was a goodness of fit there. The other piece was where, I was living in this area here in Pennsylvania at that point. There was no other school psychologist who had experience local in that area. And I kind of went like, wow, this is a need area that knowing that I could be a resource for other families. So it became strategic. It wasn't just because I wanted to expand my skills. I was kind of going, okay, this is a service that I can provide. And, and again, talking with the family, they were like, there are 4 other families and they can't find somebody that, would evaluate their kids. So that let me serve my community to some extent. So I did it so I think there's a lot of reasons in the strategy to stretch. And there are other times that, again, we can't stretch ourselves too thin either. Like, we can only read so much and do so many trainings and get so much supervision. So it's really balancing it out. And I mean, for me, I've done this long enough that, I've gone through a lot of stretch opportunities and again, love them. They've been really good. But there are times I've had cases where I go, this is maybe not the time to stretch. I'm not in the position to be able to do that. And that's not because I don't necessarily even want to. It's setting up a good boundary for myself so I'm not overstretching. When you said about over and under stretching, I think that's really important. But always having something that we're doing goals on. I mean, I think it goes back to professional development. Right? Yeah. It's like, what is our professional development plan? And sometimes these fit situations create where I take my professional development.
Right? Like you were mentioning there about like that, finding that balancing point. And, you'd mentioned trainings and, really got me thinking like what we're doing here with Psyched to Practice between the podcast, the learning platform, and really that the subscription model that we're trying to offer with, the Psyched to Practice learning platform. And, I think that is kind of a reason why we wanted to develop that because, I'm thinking about when I would look at, other training providers and just price behind it or the commitment and just feeling like, what if it's not a good fit?
Right,
What if I end up like, spending $400 or $500 on this and it's like, I'm not really getting what I expected to out of this. And so like, at the very least, I do think, in the same way we're trying to find that balancing point with, how do you find a good fit? That's part of why we wanted to do the subscription piece of that. So that way, hey, if you're starting something, you don't like it, like, hey, you don't need to finish. You don't need it to fit for you to still feel like, there's some value there. So, I get an unintentional plug here, but just something that kind of really came to mind as you're mentioning, because, sometimes I think that can be a really big barrier, and just trying to find those different ways to improve that competency and really developing or having that sense of professional development.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, with that, I just spoke with someone I guess it was last week, who is a school psychologist and had a case of selective mutism, and they were struggling, and they were like, we want more skills in this area, and I'd said like, hey, like, check out the podcast. We have, Dr. Elisa Schippenblum a while back that did a spot on the podcast, and maybe that'll give you a sense if that's something you want to pursue, or maybe and it was funny because she had reached back out and she went, oh my gosh, like I was so interested in this, like I really think I want to get more training, and now this individual's on that search, right? So I think that I think with Psyched to Practice, I think that's one of the things that's been so intriguing for me, even just doing the podcasts and coming across areas where I go, wow, I want to know more about that. And we have guests on that, they become part of my stretch protocol.
Yes.
It's where I go, oh, I want to dig deeper into that. Aaron Brennan's a great example.
Living well with psychosis. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it was one where I'm like, I'm never going to do that. And then I hear him and I go, wait a second, maybe I do want to learn. And now I've, been following some of the stuff he's done and checked out some of his trainings on other learning platforms that were great. And it's really given me a whole new vision where, again, am I going to be an expert in psychosis? I'm not, but I will say that I've had some cases since he's been a guest that it is part of my stretch plan, and I feel more comfortable in those interviews with people, and I use a different language than I did for the first 30 years of my career. Great. It's made me more comfortable. Now they are cases where if I have an evaluation, I'm not going to refer out right away. That makes it, and again, it's exciting. It's been fun to do that.
And, I think that is such an important piece because like goodness of fit should not be static or stagnant in a way. Like It should be developing and evolving.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be rapidly changing, or at least hopefully not. I'm sure there are circumstances where that is the case, but by and large, we shouldn't, I think, be at that same place, maybe as we're feeling more established in our career, what a good fit is comparatively to the very beginning. Comparatively to when we're maybe well established and we really feel like we've hit our stride. And my thought even goes to, some of the, parts of this I think are relating to transference and countertransference, but even just the perception that others have of me as a clinician. And so, early on, I was this baby faced kid, and it's like, what are you talking about? And I'll never forget there was a person who, honestly, I think we would have been a great fit. And we started getting into some topics that were relating to some trauma. And he's like, hey, it just feels really weird talking to you because you remind me of my grandson. Like that was nothing I could do to change that, challenge that. But it's like, in terms of fit, maybe I had the right skill set, but even still, like there's factors that we need to be mindful of. Yet, as time has gone on, do I still look like, that perception that he had then? Maybe that changes even just because physiologically, I'm now 8 years older than him maybe at that point. So just being able to figure out those pieces there of how are we just being mindful of that? And I don't necessarily know we need to track it, day by day, but something that if we fill out a form once that says who do we feel like are we a good fit for?
Right.
Probably should be something that we return to and update.
Yeah, I think that it's also, I like the example about the guy's perception, because I think that's important with, I mean, there's interpersonal factors that, for us and for them, I mean, that could come into play. I think when we talked about grief a while back, I said that I didn't take grief cases for a little while after my grandmother died. Like it wasn't a good fit at that time for me. And that it was an interpersonal issue that I had to kind of go, yeah, I might not be the best right now for someone else. And maybe I would have, but I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So yeah, I think I like that piece. And I think there's other, pieces around, this idea of, when you were talking, I was thinking about John Norcross's work on client preferences. And, one of the things he talks about, and I am not going to recall all the questions, but, he talks about that we find that the best fit for the client is when we ask some certain questions. And it's not about usually, what you look like. It's usually things like, do you prefer a therapist that would be, direct, or do you want somebody that's going to be more actively listening? Do you want someone that's going to give you homework that you can practice skills in between, or would you rather somebody that just keeps what you're doing in session? You get the gist of it. I won't go through all of it, but I think that's important. Like I do that when I meet somebody, I kind of say like, hey, like, what are you looking for? And then I also say, like, you have to know, like, this is kind of my style. Like, I love active listening. I love all the humanistic techniques, but I'm not great at just being a supportive therapist. Like I know that's, I'm much more of an active person. I want to get people to goals. There's those pieces. But if the person wants somebody to just be supportive, great. Let's find somebody that is the best supportive person for them. And so I like the idea of client preferences. And I wish I probably didn't get the questions exactly how John Norcross does it, but people should check out his work. I mean, he's done just extensive research about client preferences and how much that really does make a difference in success.
And I think another piece of this, and it comes back to like conducting a good intake, and maybe even the follow-up sessions afterwards. But a part of the process, and that is a question I like to ask of like, what are your preferences? And like a lot of times they're like, well, what do you mean? I try to leave it open-ended first, and then it's like, hey, like here's how I describe myself. Does this feel like it's going to be a good fit, or does it feel like it? Are there parts of that you're like, let's talk about it, because, and I not every time, but the vast majority, I try to call out. I'm like, and I want to ask, like, let's have at least a few sessions. That way we can have a little bit of data, but I know I'm not the best fit for everyone. So please, if I ever bring this up, or if you ever don't hesitate, like, you feeling like you're going to be getting, a value out of your time, out of your effort, and out of their money, like aspect of it. Like, I want to make sure that I'm not just be like, hey, yeah, I'm going to therapy, but like, I don't really know what I'm doing there. Like, I want it to feel like, like, wow, this person gets me in it. Like, I'm excited for it. And the other part of that is if they've ever been in therapy previously or any sort of treatment, I think it's immensely helpful to say, hey, what were the things that went well? And what did this clinician do that connected well? What did they not do? And it's not about talking poorly about, but it's like, what are those aspects? And like, again, being able to also not just be the yes man, but to be able to say, hey, there's qualities like that I know I'm going to bring in. Are you open to that? Like, exploring that, or does it feel like that's, has that really not something you're looking to take on right now? And so again, we can, help the clients make an informed decision for themselves of like, again, if we are open to it, but maybe we're hearing some of those yellow flags, maybe they can make an informed decision there.
Yeah, no, I that's fantastic. I have, it kind of goes back when I said, those are more important questions than kind of what you look like. And when you're talking about the guy that said, you look like his grandson, getting that discussion about what you just said, may make him go, oh, wait, this guy is a good fit for me. And maybe not, maybe he can't, but I this morning was with someone doing an evaluation and a teenager. And, as soon as she came in, she made a comment, I don't get, I look like their grandson. I get the, oh, you look like my grandpa kind of deal. And she said something to that extent. And I was kind of laughing and as we kind of went through the evaluation, I do something similar with with evaluations. Like, have you done this before? What went well? What didn't? Let me tell you a little bit about how I do this. How's that sound to you? Blah, blah, blah. And, at the end, she was like, oh, this was really great. Like, I really kind of enjoyed myself. And she's like, you don't act like my grandpa. It's like, which was like kind of, I was like, okay, that's good. Like, I'm kind of glad I did that. But, initially, and it didn't affect her initial impression of me didn't affect it. But I think that the questioning around it and helping her kind of understand the fit definitely made it a smoother process. And I think for most people that I see, I think that really goes a long way and something we can do that helps us understand the fit. And also, I think to recognize that a mismatch is not a failure. It's just information. So I've had people who go, boy, that doesn't sound like that's what I want. Okay. Like, that's okay. Like, we don't have to be a good fit. What can I do to help you find the next referral? Because at the end of the day, it's not about I want people to like me. I'm either going to be the right person for them or not. And I'm not offended if I'm not. But sometimes that's hard, I think, for us. We want to please people.
Yeah. And I think even kind of like, pulling back on a more recent episode, the imposter syndrome, like,
oh yeah,
how are we judging success, and as clinicians, and is success how well we're liked, or is success how much we're able to adapt, and allow for change? Is it how comfortable and, connected and like, feeling heard and seeing our client? Like, and I think, again, for each clinician, they need to decide how are they assessing success, because that really is then going to be an important piece of this, of like, that's going to help tailor your fit, and like, you want your fit to fit well. And like, right. So, like for you, if you were assessing how successful you are about, how much, how supportive, and, how much active listening you're using, probably not going to feel that successful. But if you're looking for how well are you able to like, motivate and create change, probably going to be a different story there. So like being able to, again, even as ourselves, like when we're assessing some of these pieces, they're not only looking at like one specific element, but it really has to be a personalized experience, I think, which again is like this tailored fit of treatment.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I think it's good for us as clinicians. It's good for those that we see. I mean, I think it's a win-win, but yeah, I guess as we're kind of wrapping up a little bit here, what about when it's not? Like, I mean, so we see somebody and let's maybe move beyond just like, I've talked about a couple that are just short. I've only known them for an intake. Well, let's say we were in therapy for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And over time we realize that the fit's not there. What's your thoughts about how we do that with some compassion? Like, what language do we use to help that transition so that I'm always concerned. I don't want people to feel abandoned. I don't want those things. So what are some thoughts that you have around that?
So I think if there's the opportunity, I like to maybe not, I want it to span over the course of a few different sessions, because I think if I were to, if I start a session talking about this and we're ending with talking about transferring, like that feels like that's a lot of rapid change. But I think even being able to like assess like, hey, maybe as I'm starting to maybe a question fit, I'm starting to then maybe assess like, hey, does it feel like you're getting a lot out of this? Like and maybe I'm asking, based off our sessions, what is your experience here? Like, what are your takeaways? And then that might even be a moment of self-disclosure. Like, there's some times where like we might just be spinning our wheels. It might feel like, we're not, there were some topics I really thought we would dig into, and the way that we've approached it hasn't felt as successful there. Does that feel like that way for you? So it's just kind of an open reflection of like, what are my takes, but also trying to be very open and curious about their experience there. And there are times when I can share that and the responses I get back, I'm like, whoa, they are experiencing something vastly different than I am. Okay, there is value in this. And so there can be that, like, just because I'm questioning doesn't mean I'm pulling the ripcord immediately. But if they're like, like, oh, no, it's great, it's great, it's great. But we're not able to really kind of identify why, then, I try to also for myself question, why is there this feeling there? And it differs case to case. I think the most recent one I've had was, he was started working with him as he was a high school senior. And then he ended up taking a break because he traveled to work someplace and came back for the start of his college semester. And he was really treating me more as a friend, like trying to make a friendship out of it rather than really trying to get, value. And, initially report absolutely. And like after that reintegrating and reconnecting, but when trying to talk have some of the conversations to like really say like, hey, here's why you're here initially. Like, it doesn't really feel like we're attending it. Like, what is going on? It felt very much like it was just like, hey, like he has a good time and he enjoys our conversations. Sure. But they're not really therapeutic conversations. Mm-hmm. And so it then had to transition over into like as much as I enjoy our conversations as well, I don't, the initial issue is still an issue. Yeah. You're still suffering or you're still struggling. There's still this impact that's going on for you. And it doesn't seem like what we're doing is working. So again, like this is kind of like spread throughout, and then being able to talk about, hey, what do I think is missing there? And like, why do I think that, and like being able to talk and assess that for them and saying, what's their openness and willingness for that? And, if they're very, very resistant, try to then maybe develop, what are our plans? Like for me, I don't feel that I am doing a service for you. So what are we then going to do? Like, here's what I'd like to see. And again, collaborative goal setting, but trying to make it much more, hey, let's give it a month, 2 months. Here's where I'd like for us to be at. Does it feel achievable? And, the individual I'm thinking of, like, yeah. And we did the same thing and we got to the 2 months and I'm like, hey, here's that point. And again, it was no surprise. And he's like, oh, okay. Like it was kind of like now I had the data, I put it out there. We ran an experiment. We got this result. And it's like, okay, yeah, like now I see where you're coming from. And ultimately he was open and receptive to that. And I find most of the time when I'm able to take some time to like work through that process, regardless of what the process is, it's generally well received. But there are some feelings of like, that my concern is I never want someone to feel like they are, you're too broken or you're too messed or, that you are too much. But being able to really just like identify, I think disclosing like, what are the parts for me that I feel like aren't aligning, and exploring with them what their experience of that is. And again, most of the time there can be some understanding and connection there. So that was really long-winded, but I don't know.
No, I love that. I think there's a couple of thoughts I had. One is, I think as I've matured as a clinician, I start having that conversation session 1 and session 2, where I'm kind of like, you gotta understand this is a trial basis. We're going to do this and see how it works. And it may be wonderful and it may not. And that's okay. And we're going to collect data throughout the phase. And at the end of my sessions, I often will say, tell me something that you thought went well during today's session. How do you think today helped us move toward our goals? Like, are we going in the right direction? Take a tangent. Where are we at with that? And so we're always assessing it. So a lot of times that makes it, I think, easier when we kind of go, you know what, maybe we're not going in the direction we want. And, I probably say this, but, I'm always kind of like, my goal is the best care possible for you. What's the best support that we can put in place for you? We're going to always assess that. And if I am that, that's great. And if not, that's okay. Like, I want you to feel comfortable to say that. And I just had somebody who I was seeing for therapy who went like, I'm not sure if this is the right fit. And, I don't love to hear that, we never do. But then I also loved that the space was safe enough for them to say it.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, this might not be right for me. Okay. Like and again, I want the best for you. So let's talk about what then can we do to help transition you to someone else, and what's that process going to look like? And I even think that becomes personal. I mean, there are times I'll recommend one person and go, hey, for what you've described, I know this clinician, this might be a really good fit for you. And then others, I'll kind of say, a few people, do some research, check them out, come back next week. I know all of them. I can give you some insight if you have questions, and let's talk about how we make that happen. So yeah, it's just open dialogue. I mean, I think it's, I think in psychology and counseling in general, we could do a better job of that up front with people. I mean, it's just always kind of going, I now just tell people, like, listen, sometimes this goes the wrong direction. Like, you may come to therapy and it may get worse. They go, what? And I'm like, yeah, like it's kind of the side effect. Like, sometimes as we talk about things, you might feel worse for a little bit. But I think if we do those things up front, that again, it kind of helps with that fit. And then when it's not a good fit, it helps us transition smoother. Maybe not faster. Like, I've had some people that it takes 4 or 5 sessions before we transition. But the therapy at that point is helping them find the next piece of it.
And I'm curious, right? Like, the kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but when you talked about like being able to provide them the best care, or for them to be provided the best care, whether that's with you or not, like, it also makes me wonder that range of, we might not be the best, but we are maybe good enough. And, and if for them, if the relationship is there, if the familiarity, and if they're like, hey, could I maybe make faster or, more significant leaps and bounds with someone else possibly, but we have an established relationship. Yeah. And I do feel like there is progress. So I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, in terms of like, if it's maybe not moving at a breakneck pace, and I realize that's not a thing, but like, if there is progress, is that good enough? Do you feel?
It depends on the person.
That's right? A good answer.
Yeah, I think it depends on. Sure. I think the tortoise and the hare is a great story, and I think for some people, they can be the hare and they can move really quick, and that feels right and it feels good. And for others, it's okay to be the tortoise, and that's all right, and that feels just as good and just as comfortable. And the relationship's great. So sure. I mean, I think that's absolutely, for me, that's part of the discussion, and I'm okay with slow. I'm not okay with none. Yeah. Like, I mean, I guess so. Like
stagnant, is that like?
Yeah, I think progress was the word that you said that's I think the most important. Like, and that can look different for. They don't have to be making the progress I want. I mean, I think that's the other piece of this. Like, and people that see me know my personality, but there are times, I probably want something to go faster or to move more, but I mean, I think it's okay. I think we have to respect what that looks like for them, but it has to be helping. Like, I think that's the key.
And again, I think the reason I wanted to ask that is it maybe, again, not for those individuals that feel like I'm the right fit for everyone, but for those individuals that feel like there has to be someone who's much better fit than I am.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting here and you're kind of questioning that, I do think, like, I'm really grateful for how you answered that, Ray, because is there progress? And like, being able to stop and like assess and say, hey, I might not have like, it might not feel like we're doing everything, but if this person is demonstrating that, them investing their time, effort, energy and money into your care, and they're seeing a result. So like there can be an okay point of like good enough, and like good enough, not as in like phoning it in, but truly, hey, this is good enough. Like, we can continue on and we can feel good about the work we're doing.
But I think that's, maybe a whole other episode at some point, but I think that's why it's so important to understand what that is from the front end. Yeah. Like, so what I don't want is people to come in and say, this is my hope of the supports that's going to happen for me. And then they like me, which is great. Again, feels good. But then they stay with me because it's comfortable, but we're not getting to where they want. And they'll go, oh no, it's okay. And I'm not okay with that. Like, so for me, I think that's why it's important to know that up front. Like, so, those questions of, hey, if we're successful, what will be different for you in 3 months? And when we have those conversations each session or later on through our interventions, are we getting there? And again, maybe we wanted to do it in 3 months and maybe we're not there yet, but we're still moving in that direction. Good enough. Yeah. I'm okay with that. But if I'm not getting them there and it's just become comfortable for them, I don't necessarily want that. It reminds me of, I'm trying to think of which professor, I think maybe an Art Freeman, when I was a student and doing a therapy class, and he had somebody come to the front of the room and we held hands and we would swing our arms back and forth. So those listening, picture 2 people facing each other, almost like shaking hands, but with loose arms. And we would swing back and forth. He'd go, that's really comfortable, but there's absolutely no movement really happening for anybody. And he said, then he takes one person, he goes, start stepping back, start putting some. We may not have to yank the person across the room, but we have to feel that pull toward the direction that we want to go. And that's always kind of stuck in my mind of when you talk about like, is that good? Yeah, that's good enough. Like if we're making a little pull, but if we're just holding hands and swinging back and forth and it feels really good, but it doesn't make the changes or the supports for that person, then I would rethink it.
Absolutely. And with that, hope you had a lot of takeaways. Hope that you're able to really step back and look at your caseload and say, hey, who am I a good fit for and who am I not? But we'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, be well, stay psyched.